So grab your Bible, head over to Jeremiah chapter 23. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Bible reading this week. You noticed Obadiah up front on the title slide. That's because that is our prophet of the month. Should we call it that, or is that corny?
I like that.
You like that?
I like that.
Which probably means it is corny, by the way. So anyway,
both of us like it. Yeah.
Anyway, that's disturbing. Yes. So we want you to keep reading in Obadiah, and if you have some questions about Obadiah, you can text me or Jeff, and we can wrap those into the podcast each week. Our prophet reading, though, remember, is in Jeremiah 23. I do need to say something about the schedule because someone actually got confused about the numbers because
dates versus verses.
Yeah. So what are those verses on the front end? And so let's be clear. So when you're looking at your schedule, the first set of numbers by the little checkbox are the dates for the month, so that doesn't confuse anyone. That's the week we'll be reading, and then the book and the verses following are the text that we'll be reading. And this week it is Jeremiah 23, verses 9 through 22. So remember, we're kind of working the prophets this year, trying to do some reading in the prophets, and so January is the primer, getting us ready to be working on some of these major prophetic themes, in addition to reading the book of Obadiah as well. So let's talk about Jeremiah 23. This needs some context. This Old Testament prophet is working in unique times and unique circumstances. And before we get to 23, we ought to say a word or two about that.
So the book of Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah himself, he is God's man in Jerusalem during the fall of Jerusalem, when God is finally
decided. Right at the end.
Yeah, right at the end. I mean,
in fact, he's caught up in that mess.
He's caught up in the disaster. He will be there before, during, and after. He is, I would call him God's color commentator. He is there to speak and to, for those who are still willing to listen to God at all in this season, this is what's really going on. This is what God is up to. And to that point, part of especially chapter 23, though it's an issue throughout this book, and so don't listen to false prophets.
There they are again.
Will tell you what you want to hear, that it's not as bad as it looks, that we're not really going to fall. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. And so part of you just, kind of making the bridge from their time to our time, the more difficult and chaotic and dark times get, the more tempted the people of God are to listen to the false prophet who, and this literally comes from elsewhere in Jeremiah, preaches peace when there is no peace, who tells you that your life is okay the way it is, and that God will really not bring judgment upon your sin, your nation's sin, and so forth.
I think that is such an important thing to realize because I think we always have this human propensity to want to be justified in what we choose to do. And so one of the things that is consistent in the Bible story, we saw that in 2 Timothy, which we did in December in our reading, this idea of accumulating teachers in accordance, I think that's the old King James, in accordance to your own desires, right? Guys who will tickle your ears and tell you what you want to hear and make you think you're okay when you're not. That's always been a problem, and it was no different in Jeremiah's day, the exception being that that's history, and so we can see how that maps out.
That's right. At the end of the day, all these false prophets who were telling the people it'll be okay and nothing bad's going to happen.
It wasn't okay.
No, the city fell under the judgment of God, and so a lot of people who needed to be repenting of their sins and preparing to meet their God, weren't. And, again, part of the jump from then to now is it's not just in terms of bad times like your nation might fall. The ultimate judgment we now know is coming. The day of the Lord comes, and telling people that they're okay in the way that they're living, because we don't, and people want to be told you're okay in the way you're living, whether it's sexual sin, whatever form of worldliness, even things that might not be wrong in of themselves, but might not be putting the kingdom first. We want prophets and teachers who will tell us it's okay the way you're living, and God through Jeremiah is saying you need to have the stomach to hear, because part of this is not just about the false prophets and judgment on them, though the text includes that, but part of it is, like in verse 16, thus says the Lord of hosts to his people, you do not listen to the words of the prophets who prophesy to you, filling you with vain hopes. Don't pick who you're listening to on the basis of the fact that this is what you want to hear. You want some empty false hope rather than being, hearing the truth of God about your life, what needs to change, and that we need to get ready for death and the day of judgment.
So we're working a really narrow segment of that this week in Jeremiah 23. This is going to be 9 through 22. That's the segment. What should the readers be looking for as they're going through this segment? Are there specific spots in here that you think are especially important that when you chose this, you were thinking of, hey, watch for this?
Absolutely. So certainly, we just hit kind of the negative, the dark part, right? Which is warning about false prophets, and don't pick your teachers on the basis of who says what you want to hear versus what you need to hear.
Right.
What you need to hear is almost always unpleasant and painful, especially if you've not been following God closely for a while.
Yeah.
But that being said, the real reason I picked this text out is, and this is a little bit more on the positive side of the ledger, in the midst of condemning false prophets and warning his people about false prophets, God also gives one of the most powerful portraits of what makes a true prophet a true prophet. And so you'll see this in verse 18, you will see this in verse 22, for who among them, among the false prophets, verse 18, has stood in the counsel of the Lord to see and to hear his word, or who has paid attention to his word and listened. And by the same token, verse 22, but if they, the false prophets, had stood in my counsel, then they would have proclaimed my words to the people, and they would have turned them from their evil way and from the evil of their deeds. One of the most powerful, and to my mind, kind of makes you kind of amazed a little bit. Part of what makes a true prophet, even if it's not always explicitly stated in some prophet's experience, these are men who, in some way that were never fully explained, they've stood in the counsel of God. And you see this, sometimes you do see this explicitly in other places. Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah is called, right? He's in the temple, then all of a sudden he's in the real presence of God, and he hears, who will we send? And Isaiah famously says, here am I, send me. I think about stories like in 1 Kings, I think it's 22, when Micaiah, the true prophet amongst the false prophets that
That's
Ahab
a great story.
It's a great story, but part of what Micaiah let slip is basically, I was in the presence of God, I was in the counsel of God, I heard that, there was a deceiving spirit willing to go deceive Ahab, and that's why all these false prophets are here telling Ahab what he wants to hear. So Micaiah says, we don't think of Micaiah as a major prophet in the Bible because he doesn't have a book. He's simply saying, I was in the counsel of God. I was there. The Bible never fully explains how these men do that, but here now comes Jeremiah saying, part of what makes a true prophet is, amazingly, these are men, like we saw with Isaiah, like we saw with Micaiah, these are men who have stood, who have been summoned into the very presence of God, before the throne of God, into his heavenly court, to hear the word of the Lord and be the messenger back to mankind. Thus saith the Lord. That's an amazing thing. But that's part of what makes a true prophet the true prophet.
Yeah, he's heard the word. I'm looking at 18 again.
Yeah.
He has heard the word. He has given heed to his word.
That's right.
And listened.
That's right.
So this is, the prophet himself isn't just taking in that message,
right,
but he's also acting on it and doing what the Lord said.
And that's the thing. Part of what makes the true prophet is, and again, you read through this whole context, he's not prophesying according to his own mind or his own vision or his own dream, depending on where you're reading. The true prophet has not just been summoned in the presence of God, but he willingly breaks himself to that message, accepts that message. Yeah. That's part of what makes a true prophet, is he's willing to basically hear hard things and pass them on.
Yeah, I think that's what we wind up with, is these underlying sort of foundation stone principles. In this case, the goal is to hear God.
Yeah, that's right.
You can always find someone who will tell you something different, who's willing to share their mind.
Right.
But who wants that? Why would I care what any man had to say?
Right.
Ultimately, I want to know God and I want to know his will. And I think one of the things we need to be determined to do is to figure out how I do that. Who has spoken for the Lord so that I can hear him and do what he said?
Well said. No, I think that's exactly right. And you see this elsewhere in the prophets, some of which we may or get to in our readings this year, but it's the heart open to the word of the Lord.
Yeah.
That matters.
Yeah, I think it is the most important issue of life. If you are open to the notion of God at all,
right,
then all of life becomes, is there anything I can know about him?
Yeah.
Or perhaps more to the point, can I know what he wants from me? And if so...
And am I willing to do it if I know it?
Well, what then is more important than that? No, I'm stunned by people who say, well, I think a God may exist, but, are ambivalent about the search for him.
Yeah.
And I can't think, what are you looking for that's more important than finding and understanding God?
No, that's right.
So, anyway, that's the segment for Jeremiah 23. So spend some time working through that segment and considering that contrast here between the true prophet and the the false prophet, and in our own time to be concerned that we are hearing from God. And spend some time working through the book of Obadiah again. If, like I said, if you have some questions, we'd love to entertain those. Happy to work through that text with you as you're making your way through that in your reading.